Well, I made a mistake and I lost one of the videos. I guess when my battery went out, it made me lose it. But I'm going to read and make sure that you don't miss this portion of the book. But when I get to a certain place, I will end it early because it'll be in the next video and you don't want to hear it twice probably. Okay. At the end of that session I just was reading, this was Rob's notes. Once the session was over, Jane began to yawn repeatedly, her eyes wet. My writing hand was practically free of tension now. The members of Jane's ESP class have been putting the ideas of personal reality to good use. Strangely, I'm going to make this a little bigger. Okay. The members of Jane's ESP class have been putting the ideas in personal reality to good use. Strangely, this has made Jane somewhat impatient, since she can only proceed with what Seth has given so far. She finds herself in the odd position of envying future readers who will be able to go through the finished work and make use of it as a unit. The next morning, Jane told me that she and/or Seth worked on the book all night. Each time I woke up, dictation or stuff like that was going on. It was pretty insistent, almost unpleasantly so at times. She'd experienced such effects before in connection with the book. They aren't a nightly occurrence by any means, but I suggested she tell herself upon retiring that she wouldn't be aware of such activity during sleeping hours. We plan to ask Seth about it also. Session 620. Late this afternoon, Jane received a call from a senior editor of Time magazine. He wants to talk to her later this week in connection with a cover story he is to write about Richard Bosch. Dick's book has become a national phenomenon. And that was about Jonathan Livingston Seagull, which is a book I also read on this channel, if you want to go find it. Good evening. Good evening, Seth. I hope you have time for me. I get it, yes. We will then resume dictation. Your beliefs generate emotion. It is somewhat fashionable to place feelings above conscious thoughts, the ideal being that emotions are more basic and natural than conscious reasoning is. The two actually go together, but your conscious thinking largely determines your emotions and not the other way around. Your beliefs generate the appropriate emotion that is implied. A long period of inner depression does not just come upon you. Your emotions do not betray you. Instead, over a period of time, you have been consciously entertaining negative beliefs that then generated the strong feelings of despondency. If emotion could be trusted above conscious reasoning, then there would be little point in aware thought at all. You would not need it. You are not at the mercy of your emotions either, for they are meant to follow the flow of your reasoning. Your mind is meant to perceive the physical environment clearly, and its judgments about the environment then activate the body's mechanisms to bring about proper response. If your beliefs about existence are fearful, then the emotional reactions will be those leading to stress. Your own value judgments need examination in such a case. Your imagination, of course, fires your emotions, and it also follows your beliefs faithfully. As you think, so you feel, and not the other way around. Later, we will have some comments regarding hypnotism. Here let me mention that in those terms, you hypnotize yourself constantly with your own conscious thoughts and suggestions. The term hypnosis merely applies to a quite normal state in which you concentrate your attention, narrowing your focus to a particular area of thought or belief. You concentrate with great vigor upon one ideal, usually to the exclusion of others. It is a quite conscious performance. As such, it also portrays the importance of belief. For using hypnosis, you force feed a belief to yourself, or one given to you by another, a hypnotist. But you concentrate all your attention upon the ideal presented. Here, as in normal life, your emotions and actions follow your beliefs. If you believe you are sick, then for all intents and purposes you are sick. If you believe that you are healthy, then you are healthy. There is much written about the nature of healing, and there will be material in this book dealing with it. But there is also healing in reverse, in which case an individual loses a belief in his or her health and accepts instead the ideal of personal illness. Here the belief itself will generate the negative emotions that will indeed bring about a physical or emotional illness. The imagination will follow, painting dire mental pictures of a particular condition. Before long, physical data bears out the negative belief, negative in that it is far less desirable than a concept of health. I mention this here simply because in the overall development of an individual, an illness may also be used as a method to achieve another constructive end. In such a case, belief would also be involved. Such a person would have to believe that an unhealthy condition was the best way to serve another purpose. Other means would seem closed to him because of various personal beliefs that would form a vacuum in his experience. That is, he would see no other way, perhaps, to achieve the same end. This will be discussed much more thoroughly later in the book. One belief, of course, can be dependent upon many others, each generating its own emotion and imaginative reality. The belief in illness itself depends upon a belief in human unworthiness, guilt, and imperfection, for example. The mind does not hold just active beliefs. It contains many others in a passive state. These lie latent, ready to be focused upon and used. Any of them can be brought to the fore when a conscious thought acts as a stimulus. If you are focusing upon ideas of poverty, illness, or lack, for example, your conscious mind also holds, latently, concepts of health, vigor, and abundance. If you divert your thoughts from the negative ideas to the positive ones, then your concentration will begin to alter the balance. The vast reservoir of energy and potential within you is called into action under the leadership of your conscious mind. Because you are reasoning as creatures, because you have available such varieties of experience, the human species developed reasoning abilities that are meant to evolve and grow as they are used. Your consciousness expands as you use it. You become more conscious as you exercise these faculties. A flower cannot write a poem about itself. You can. And in so doing, your own consciousness turns around about itself. It literally becomes more than it was. Existing in such diversified, rich environment possibilities, the human psyche needed and developed a conscious mind that could make fairly concise and accurate, minute-by-minute judgments and evaluations. As the conscious mind grew, now so did the range of imagination. The conscious mind is a vehicle for the imagination in many ways. The greater its knowledge, the further the reach of imagination. In return, imagination enriches conscious reasoning and emotional experience. You have not learned to use your consciousness properly or fully, so that it seems that imagination, emotions, and reasoning are separate faculties, or something set against each other. The mature conscious mind, once more, accepts data from the exterior world and from the interior one. It is only when you believe that consciousness must be attuned only to exterior conditions that you force it to cut yourself off from inner knowledge, intuitional voices, and the depths from which it springs. You may take your break. Jane had spoken for Seth at a deliberate pace throughout the delivery in a rather dry voice. Her trance had been good. This proved to be the end of book work for the evening. Seth came through with 5 additional pages of material for Jane and me, however, and the session ended at 11:45. Session 621. Seth spoke through Jane 5 times last week. On Monday and Wednesday evenings, he furnished material on this book, plus some personal material for us, discoursed at length Tuesday night in ESP class. Spoke briefly Friday afternoon to a visiting editor from Time magazine. Subject, Freudian psychology. And on Saturday evening talked informally to a group of our friends about daily life in Italy during the time he had been a minor pope in the 4th century A.D., reincarnation-wise. Seth had first mentioned his papal experience in an ESP class session in May 1971. I made just a few notes on the Saturday night material after our guest left. We'd been discussing current population problems when Seth came through to tell us that in the 4th century, infanticide, at least to his knowledge, had been quite common. Before a child was baptized, it was considered to be the property of its parents, who could do with it as they wished, with no stigma attached. Surplus children, who would have been an impossible burden upon the economy of the times, its housing, food supply, etc., were simply killed before baptism. Once the child was baptized, however, it became a sacred being possessing a soul and the right to life. Seth added that our records of those early centuries are confused as far as the church, baptism, and children are concerned. There was quite a bit more to the session, but I didn't think my memory of it was clear enough for accurate notes. Good evening again. Good evening, Seth. Dictation. I am not minimizing the importance of the inner self. All of its infinite resources are placed at the disposal of your conscious mind, however, and for your conscious purposes. There has been on the one hand a too great reliance upon the conscious mind, while its characteristics and mechanisms were misunderstood, so that proponents of the conscious reasoning mind above all theories advocate a use of intellect and reasoning power while not recognizing their source in the inner self. The conscious mind was therefore expected to perform alone, so to speak, ignoring the highly intuitive inner information that is also available to it. It was not supposed to be aware of such data. Yet any individual knows quite well that intuitive hunches, inspiration, precognition, information or clairvoyant material has often risen to conscious knowledge. Usually it is shoved away and disregarded because you have been taught that the conscious mind should not hold with such nonsense. So you have been told to trust your conscious mind, while at the same time you were led to believe it could only be aware of stimuli that came to it from the outside physical world. On the other hand, there are those who stress the great value of the inner self, the emotional being, at the expense of the conscious mind. These theories hold that the intellect and usual consciousness are far inferior to the inner unconscious portions of being, and that all the answers are hidden from view. The followers of this belief consider the conscious mind in such derogatory terms that it almost seems to be a supercilious cancer that sprouted like a growth upon man's psychic, impeding rather than aiding his progress and understanding. Both groups ignore the miraculous unity of the psyche, the fine natural interworkings that exist between the so-called conscious mind and the so-called unconscious, the incredibly rich interaction as each gives and takes. The unconscious simply contains a great portions of your own experience, in which you have been taught not to believe. Again, your conscious mind is meant to look into the exterior world and into the interior one. The conscious mind is a vehicle for the expression of the soul in corporeal terms. It is your method of assessing temporal experience according to the beliefs that it holds about the nature of reality. It automatically causes the body to react in certain ways. I cannot say this often enough. Your beliefs form your reality, your body and its conditions, your personal relationships, your environment, and en masse, your civilization and world. Your beliefs automatically attract the appropriate emotions. They reinforce themselves through imagination. And at the risk of repeating myself, because this is so important, imagination and feeling follow your beliefs. It is not the other way around. If, now, a brief, innocuous enough example, if you meet an individual often enough and think, he gives me a pain in the neck, it is surely no coincidence that you find yourself with a painful neck in future encounters with this person. The suggestion is quite a conscious one, however, given by yourself and carried out not symbolically, but most practically, most literally. In other words, the conscious mind gives its orders and the inner self carries them out. In this existence, you are physically oriented. Surely then the conscious physicality or physically oriented mind is the one that is meant to make deductions about the nature of physical reality. Otherwise, you would have no free will. In Western culture, since the Industrial Revolution, the idea grew that there was little connection between the objects in the world and the individual. Now, this is not a history book, so I will not go into the reasons behind this ideal, but will merely mention that it was an overreaction, in your terms at least, to previous religious concepts. Before that time, man did believe that he could affect matter and the environment through his thoughts. With the Industrial Revolution, however, even the elements of nature lost their living quality in man's eyes. They became objects to be categorized, named, torn apart, and examined. You did not dissect a pet cat or dog, so when a man began to dissect the universe in those terms, he had already lost his sense of love for it. It became soulless for him. Only then could he examine it, you see, without qualm and without being aware of the living voice that protested. And so, in his great fascination for what made things work, in his great curiosity to understand the heredity of a flower, say, he forgot what he should also learn by smelling a flower, looking at it, watching it be itself. So he examined dead nature. Often he had to kill life in order, he thought, to discover its reality. You cannot understand what makes things live when you must first rob their life. And so when man learned to categorize, number, and dissect nature, he lost its living quality and no longer felt a part of it. To some important extent he denied his heritage, for spirit is born into nature and the soul, and for a time resides in flesh. Man's thoughts no longer seemed to have any effect upon nature, because in his mind he saw himself apart from it. In an ambiguous fashion, while concentrating upon nature's exterior aspects in a very conscious manner, he still ended up denying the conscious powers of his own mind. He became blind to the connection between his thoughts and his physical environment and experience. Nature became then an adversary that he must control. Yet underneath, he felt that he was at the mercy of nature, because in cutting himself off from it, he also cut himself off from using many of his own abilities. It was at this point that the nature of the conscious mind itself became so misunderstood, and those unrecognized or denied powers were assigned to unconscious portions of the self by ensuing schools of psychology. Very natural functions of the conscious mind, therefore, were assigned to the underground and cut off from normal use. Now you may take your break. And I will end this session because I think I read to the point and maybe a little beyond it where the next video will begin. every now and then I lose a video. And someone who's reading along with me will invariably point it out to me, and I have to go and put it in, because people don't want to not hear the entire book. Although some of the notes that Rob makes I do maybe not read. And dates and things I don't read. The dates of the sessions. But anyway, this is the Dove Lady, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.